Welcome and thank you for coming. This is MGT number 5360, and we're going to talk about self-service application networking and security with vRealize automation and NSX. I'm Andrew Volmer. I'm a product manager on the NSX product, and with me I have Becky Smith. She is my counterpart on the vRealize automation product. So the two of us work together on producing a joint solution between the two products that enables a major part of the SDDC to allow you to automatically deliver networking and security as part of your application templates. We have a disclaimer slide. I'm sure you guys have seen this already in other presentations, so some of this that we might discuss could be futures. In general, what we're covering is all shipping product today, and at the end we're going to have a demo. We're going to try a live demo, so hopefully that'll go well and you can see the product in action. Okay, so IT automation and the next wave of efficiency. So traditional IT, VMware virtualized workloads in a way that really made it easy to move from taking weeks to deploy a server by having to order it and rack mount it and put a CD-ROM in the CD-ROM drive and install and patch and all that, to the ability to clone a VM and get it up and running very quickly. And we've also introduced the concept of resource pooling and hardware optimization. But that only goes so far in terms of automation. With this next wave of automation, with vRealize automation and with NSX, we can actually accelerate it even further. We can add that automation layer that you're used to getting on the VM to networking and security components, so that through a software-driven, API-driven application, you can deliver all the networking and security you need for your application in addition to your compute and storage needs. And this really is an incredible efficiency that you get above and beyond what you got in the past. We can actually deliver a complete multi-tiered application within minutes, and we'll demo that at the end of the, after the main part of the presentation. So typical cloud user, they want their application, they want it now. They're not worried about the infrastructure. They just need the infrastructure to work, be able to be delivered. They want to be able to click in one button and from a catalog and deploy a complete application. But with the world of networking and security, you have different roles. You have the traditional VI admin or compute admin who manages the compute infrastructure. Then you have the networking admin whose goal is to deliver high performance, high networking efficiency. And then the security team, who usually has the opposite goal of the networking. I always think it's funny that the networking team wants to get the packet from point A to point B as fast as possible, and the security team seems like the other end of the spectrum. They want to block everything. The default answer is no. But all these people have to coexist in the world of cloud, and they need to be able to participate in the delivery of applications within IT or to developers or ultimately to end customers. So we have built a model to allow for this with VRA sitting on top of NSX. So agenda today, brief review of the software-defined data center. We'll talk a bit about how NSX works, and then we'll talk about VRA. I'm going to call it VRA just to shorten it up a bit. And when I say that, I mean vRealize automation. And then we'll actually do the demo and see it in action. So you guys probably already heard a lot about the software-defined data center. So before I get into that, let's talk a bit about sort of what exists in a data center. You have the physical infrastructure. You have the compute. You have the storage. And then finally, ultimately, you have the networking and the security components. So these are all part of what needs to be delivered to modern infrastructure as a service as a complete application. So with VMware, we deliver this on both the hybrid cloud as well as on in the form of both private clouds that you can run on-prem or with public clouds, whether or not it be the VMware vCloud Air or other public clouds that both NSX and VRA work with. So the key message here is that before NSX and VRA, some of this process here used to take days and days as you wait through a cycle of creating a ticket in a help desk system, eventually waiting for the individual to do the task, get to the next step, and ultimately delivering the application to the end customer. But with the SDDC, we have a complete software-driven system. So we have an API on all of our applications. NSX has its built-in REST API. There's the vCenter APIs. And then all the automation that's done through the orchestrator and through VRA. So this software-defined data center gives you a complete platform of compute, network, and storage, but in addition gives you the cloud management layer on top to be able to automate those processes. Okay, so what happens with a combination of ESX for your compute virtualization, NSX for your networking and security. You add those two together, you combine them with VRA as an automation tool, and you can move from those days or weeks to deploy applications down to pure minutes. Again, I'll demo this at the end, but you can deploy a complete multi-tiered application in just a matter of a minute or two, depending on the performance of your underlying infrastructure. So from days or weeks down to hours or minutes. That's the key message. So a little bit on NSX. How many of you have been to NSX 101 presentation or another presentation? Okay, quite a few. So it might be a bit of a repeat here. So what we've done with NSX is we wanted to build a network virtualization layer to abstract away from what we call the underlay hardware. So here you see a bunch of networking, switching, and routing equipment. And this can be any vendor that supports IP connectivity. So you take your hypervisors or your hosts and you connect them up to each other. This can be a fabric that's based on Cisco, it could be based on Arista, it could be based on Dell, it can be any combination of vendors. On top of that, we layer the compute infrastructure. And on each host, we install something called the NSX vSwitch. So this is an in-kernel module virtualized switch that allows you to connect and form an abstraction layer called the network hypervisor. And on top of this abstraction layer, we can support logical components. And these logical components can be logical switches, logical routers, logical firewalls, and logical load balancers, all of which are software constructs. So no longer do you have to manually install something, physically configure it, type config T at the terminal, all that kind of classic things. These are all driven through an API and all driven through a GUI. So if you need another switch, you just hit the plus button in the GUI, it'll make the switch on demand. If you need to change the routing, you can do that. But even more importantly, with a VRA solution on top, with an automation tool, you let your users do that through the form of blueprinting and catalog delivery. So we're going to bring the operational model of the virtual machine to networking and security components. So here we are, the fundamental components of NSX: switching, virtualized switching, routing, firewalling, policy, groups, and tags. This is particularly useful in the security world where we can define a security policy. Say you want all of your web tiers just to have port 80 or port 443 access. You can define a policy that would apply to all web tier applications in your entire enterprise. We have virtualized load balancing on the edge service gateway in NSX. We have a VPN solution, both L2 VPN and SSL-based VPNs. And then we have the ability to connect between the physical world and the virtual world. And we do that in two ways. One is at layer 3 with our edge service gateways, but also at layer 2 with a variety of partners who produce what we call a top-of-rack gateway. And there are companies like Arista and Dell, and they do virtual tunnel endpoints on their hardware layer. So all of this component is all driven, again, from the management API, so it can all be programmatically controlled. So this is ultimately the application example that we always use in most of our slides of what we're going to build. And we'll build something very similar to this today. This has a web tier, an app tier, and a database tier. Now, it's very straightforward, which is vCenter to make the VMs. You can just clone a VM, something like that. But the most important thing here is that each tier has a logical switch. And those logical switches are connected via that logical router. Well, let me get the laser pointer here. So these lines are your switches. So each of these is a layer 2 domain. And then you have a logical router that's built in software. And you have a logical load balancer if you want to load balance the web tier, the app tier, the database tier. And then the entire application is protected by a app layer firewall rule set. So this is firewalls that protect the entire app. But more importantly, you also want to protect within the application. So these represent firewall rules that apply to each tier of the application. So there's between tier protection. So you might only allow from the app tier to the database tier the port and protocol required to make MySQL work or SQL Server or whatever your database application is. So some examples of what might be allowed to each of these tiers, both on the inbound and outbound basis. So the key with NSX and VRA is that we can develop a blueprint that will create all this stuff automatically in software, and including, and most importantly, the networking and security components, which prior to NSX all required manual intervention. So we'll talk a bit. I'm going to hand this over to Becky, and she's going to talk a bit about how VRA works.
Pointer too.
There's your pointer.
Thank you, Andrew. How many of you guys are using vRealize automation today? Good, a fair amount of the room, okay. How many of you at least are aware of it who are not actually using it? Okay, good. Then we'll make this quick so we can get to the demo, get to the meat of it. We know how much you guys love slides, like we all do. So, but for a quick refresher for those on VRA, it really gives you the ability to onboard the cloud at multiple stages of maturity in your environment, where you're at from an automation perspective, how close you're getting to self-service delivery, right? We talk to customers who are simply just trying to automate IT tasks, all the way up to delivering self-service, catalog, multi-tier applications to the end consumer that may be an internal or external consumer in their environment. And so when you look at VRA, we're really here to help you automate whatever phase you're at there and help you really grow to be able to do more with less when it comes to ensuring things are done consistently, standardization in your environment, and just lack of kind of manual errors and mistakes as you go through. So we have customers on the one end who are very low governance. They don't need approvals and policies in place. They just need to deliver those workloads and the applications quicker, all the way up to high governance, highly secure environments. They still want to be able to automate, make sure all the right checkpoints are in place. So we can help you in all of those areas. When we take a look at kind of the basis of VRA, we've got multiple constructs in the product. You first organize by business groups and users. So who has access to what? Who's allowed to request what resources and how those things are delivered. Then you pool your resources, right? So you may have virtual, you may have physical, you may have public cloud, combination. How do you want to break up those resources? You've got different tiers and SLAs for those environments, right? Production obviously gets the best equipment out there, the highest SLAs, high RMA numbers, where maybe the dev test environment, you're running on lower equipment, you know, you'll answer the ticket in a few days. It's not critical, as I look at my tester in the audience right now. So you have the ability now to divide up these environments and these resources and pool them and then assign them to those business groups, to those users or authorized, and entitle them to the different resources. And then finally, you have the actual blueprint that you build out that defines what the machine's going to be, the network and security interfaces, which I'll show you soon, and the whole life cycle, right? So what's the process there? What's the approval process if there needs to be one when this thing is requested? What happens when I go to tear it down? And VRA will help you automate all that cleanup as well. So let's talk about VRA and NSX together. Andrew mentioned earlier the overall infrastructure delivery time and application delivery time. If we double click just on networking, there's a lot of manual effort around networking security we still hear in the customer base, right? It takes sometimes weeks just to get the network configured appropriately once the VM's been provisioned, another couple of weeks sometimes for security to sign off, and now that thing's actually live and ready to go. Some of the examples, right? You could have a ticket for the switching, the routing, the firewall, and the load balancing. Sometimes this is all going to the same administrator, sometimes totally different teams in the organization that you're waiting on. Right, making sure you've got the appropriate connectivity, especially in the physical world, it takes even longer, right? Getting a new firewall rule approved in the environment, right? Making sure that it doesn't break anything else, gets a vulnerability out there. That can take some time to evaluate. So with VRA and NSX, we want to really help reduce that and allow you to programmatically define those things. So we'll start first with the connectivity that Andrew mentioned earlier. In this example, 3 tiers, right, with a router between them. Gives the ability for you to define for the applications whether they're going to go onto dedicated network segments themselves or actually go onto a shared flat network, right? So you have the ability to use pre-existing networking or do what we call on-demand network configuration. So for the application, we can on-demand spin up those logical switches, those routers, and set those things up. Then as you vMotion, you ensure you've got connectivity across your environment without having to do any manual reconfiguration. Then we have the security aspects, right? So Andrew talked about the different layers here where you can do the different segmentation of what communications allowed in and out of that web tier versus your app tier versus your database tier, and then for the entire application to the rest of your environment and even public. We can do, again, this based on on-demand security or pre-existing. So depending on your security teams or if you're the security guy in the room, right, you may feel comfortable saying, I'm going to predefine all the security policies for the different applications and define that up front. And then you can check these blueprint definitions to make sure the appropriate security policies are assigned. So every time that gets provisioned, the security is there from day one. Or you can go so far as to say, you know what, we're not sure yet, right? This application, we haven't figured out all the security policies ahead of time. We don't have everything predefined. So let me, as I'm defining this, pick those groups or pick those policies and automatically build those firewall rules for that application. And then later when I tear it down, remove all those. So you have that level of flexibility, plus including NSX's third-party security integrations. So beyond distributed firewall and some of those advantages that Andrew talked about, NSX has a strong partnership with several security vendors out there. So if you want to tie in your antivirus, your intrusion detection and prevention, those sorts of security services with your applications as they get deployed, you can do that. And VRA, we consume all that through our NSX integration. The load balancing, right? Ensuring that certain applications that require that availability, you can dynamically build out a load balancer dedicated to this application, and then it's torn down when the application comes down, or you can connect up to existing load balancers. So again, depending on the needs of the application and how you have your environment configured. The really nice thing about NSX's load balancer, though, is it's not physical, right? And you're not paying for each instance of that load balancer as it gets spun up. So you get that capability with NSX just like you get with the security functionality. We're not going to charge you per load balancer instance. You pay by the CPU on the hypervisor. And then finally, you get to take advantage of NSX's network performance capabilities and all the inline things that NSX provides. By being in the ESX hypervisor in the kernel, you're able to get line rate firewall and routing. And you can't get that going out to a whole separate box on the network and getting that answer, whether or not these two VMs are allowed to communicate and coming all the way back in. So you get some really good performance there from networking and security perspective. So with that, how would you model your application, right? The whole point of blueprints in VRA is define once and reuse multiple times. Help you get that standardization in your environment, help remove a lot of those manual tasks. Give you options at deployment time. So your end consumer, whether it's an IT person, someone on the help desk, or an actual end user in a line of business, has the ability to set some options at request time. So you control what they're allowed to request and whether they're allowed to tweak how many CPUs they may want, the size of memory they get, things like that. We can also support multiple network topologies. So we've been talking about kind of that 3-tier application and 3 tiers of the network. We can also support a flat network where you want to do micro-segmentation on that network, and we'll show you that in just a minute. And again, repeatable deployments, right? Consistency. That's what automation is really all about, is it's taking the manual effort out of the tasks, getting them repeatable and standardizing wherever you can in your industry or in your environment, and then where you have to customize, still giving you that flexibility to allow the customization when needed. So all the way from a simple single machine that you're delivering with network and connectivity to a true multi-tier application. And then we've got a catalog. So this is where you take those blueprints you've defined, and now you're publishing them to your end consumer. So you have the ability to control who's entitled to request which blueprints, which machines, what type of applications, and also where those things are allowed to be placed. So we've got intelligent policy-based placement to decide, hey, I'm a dev user, I don't get to put stuff in production, right? So that's not only I don't get to put stuff on the production network, I don't get to put stuff on the production equipment and hardware itself, right? So I'm going into a cluster that's been utilized or dedicated for development purposes. You can order your network and security along with your machines and your applications. VRA calls the NSX APIs to do all this work. So whether it's connecting to existing or building out on demand, we actually talk to the NSX APIs through a vRealize orchestrator plugin. And so that's how we do all of our communication. We also handle your IP addressing. So VRA allows you to do your IPAM right within VRA. So you can set up your IP pools, we'll assign those, and we'll reclaim them when you just machines, or we can integrate with IPAM solutions out there, like your Infoblox, Blue Cats of the world. So we give you options there as well. And then finally, the cleanup, which is really important when it comes to IP addressing, networking, security and firewall rules. When things get destroyed, it can take a lot of effort to go clean it up. And for those of you who have ever played in historic firewall tables, and I know I have as a Linux admin, you're so scared to delete a rule, right? Because you don't know what it's going to affect, what's going to happen. With NSX's model and the fact that the rules are based on objects and those rules are dynamically created, you don't have to put the IP necessarily in. It does it by the object ID. That object gets removed. We remove all the relevant things in NSX. So we pull it off the switch. We pull it out of the security groups and those policies. So that's all handled for you. So you're able to manage a much smaller set of those security policies and firewall rules than just having hundreds and hundreds, right, that you're trying to maintain. So this is kind of an example of you had a catalog item here and you hit the request button, right? You've got the blueprint that defines all of the compute and storage characteristics of that machine and what you're looking for, or those multiple machines, but also your connectivity through who's the default gateway, where am I getting my IP addresses for my network profiles, what security am I putting on there, am I setting security tags, am I joining existing security groups, capabilities like that, and then also your load balancing definition. So again, in the blueprint, you're defining what your load balancing is going to look like, right? What services you're going to get from that NSX load balancer. So the three use cases we're going to demo for you today, we're going to try to get through all three. If not, we'll at least demo one, is on-demand networking security. So this is full, dev test environment's a great place for this, where you're spinning up and spinning down environments all the time. They're not staying and running for months or years. So fully on-demand, build my network, build my security, tear it all down when I'm done. Micro-segmentation on top of a physical or an existing network. So maybe you've got a large flat network as a schema that you want to use, but you want to make sure you're controlling the traffic between all those VMs on that network and doing true micro-segmentation at the virtualization layer. And then even existing networking and security, right? So if you want to start smaller and just connect to existing networks, utilize your existing security groups, you can do that as well. So we'll kind of walk you through. These are our three out-of-the-box scenarios. So this is kind of a picture for you. We've got an existing router out there, but everything else that you notice is colored here is actually going to be built on demand. So we're going to build the logical switches here and that router, right? VRA is going to have NSX build that up for this application, this two-tier app here that we've got. And again, it could be single or multi-tiered. You can do routed or NAT networks, one-to-one or one-to-many on demand. Then we're going to do the IP addressing, assign the IPs to the VMs, do the on-demand security groups. So I specified, hey, for database, I've got these security policies that I need to apply, build that group, apply the policies, add the VM to that group, and NSX manages that. And then also the load balancer here, and spinning up that logical load balancer. It's going to load balance that app tier, or the web tier for you there. So that's one example. The next one is a more of a flat existing network, but I've got this application I want to deploy. My networking's already in place, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and connect them to this pre-existing logical switch in NSX, but I'm still going to do that on-demand security to control not only the communication here between these two VMs in the same application, but to also control how everything talks in and out of the application itself on this network. And I've got a picture later that'll kind of show you how we blow this out, and you can really get a feel for that micro-segmentation on an existing network. So the security policies are applied dynamically, right? Micro-segmentation on that layer 2 network. And then your load balancing configuration, again, can be dynamically deployed here just for this application. Or we have another example where you can connect up to an existing one. And everything gets destroyed at the end. And then here's all existing. Not as pretty of a picture, right? It's all gray. It's not as much fun. No. This is where you've already done the prep work. You've got your network set up. They're organized. You've worked with the security admins. You've got your grouping set up. You know these are applications your industry, your organization has run. You know what they need, and you're just going to go ahead and place them where they need to go. So as each new one spins up, it gets placed effectively onto that pre-existing network and into those security. Now you can still utilize security tags, which is great. So NSX allows you to do dynamic security group membership through tagging. So you're not having to maintain static lists of those memberships. So I can tag something, a database server or a PCI workload. And then at NSX, I've got multiple security groups where these policies are getting applied based on those tags. And so then if I need to change the security posture of a system later, I change the tagging, NSX handles the application of those security policies. And again, that includes not only the distributed firewall capabilities and access control lists in NSX, but that also includes the third-party integrations, antivirus, right, like we talked about before, intrusion detection. Even those solutions can update the security tags in NSX as well. So if a virus is found, it can tag it and quarantine that system until you fix it and then put it back where it goes. So a lot of power there in the way that you can make sure your security is not only applied at provisioning time, but your security posture is maintained throughout the life cycle of that application. So the cloud user is going to pick this environment, and then the VMs are going to be provisioned, and everything's going to get connected and tagged appropriately. Okay. And again, a single machine, multi-tier, depends on what you're looking for. In this scenario, a lot of times we see most customers using this for their routed networks, but you could support other network topologies if you want. So this is what I wanted to show you guys, kind of side by side, right? Here's a multi-tier app with multiple networks. Again, we can spin this all up on demand. And then here's more of a flat network, right, where you're doing more micro-segmentation on the same network. So you've got a lot of choice here in how you design and build out these applications. And honestly, most customers that Andrew and I speak to do a combination of both, right? In some of the environments, they're doing the tiering, and in others, it's flat, right? So it's usually not a one or the other, but a combination. And this single flat, you'll actually see it grow out here. So this is what true micro-segmentation would look like. This is one flat subnet and all of these applications and VMs with all these security containers, right? Making sure the appropriate communication and traffic is flowing and that you're not passing data where you shouldn't, right? So with that, let's get to the meat of it. Andrew's going to come up here and demo for us.
All right, I forgot to ask, how many people, this is the first time you've ever been to San Francisco? Got a few? Okay, cool. Good to know. All right. How many of you consider yourself a VI admin, virtual infrastructure admin, sysadmin? Okay. Any networking guys in the room? Gals? A couple? Got some. Any firewall admins? Okay, cool. Any developers? You might be cloud users, right? Okay. Just want to get a taste of that. Okay, so last year after VMworld, I asked during VMworld, I asked a bunch of people who are participating what they want to see generally in a VMworld session. And I got over and over again, you guys like to see live demos, live in-action stuff. So we're going to gamble here and hope it all works. Credit to Bruce, who was 5 seconds ago sitting in the front row.
Oh, and now we're calling,
and
he's in the
ran
back.
off, right. So he put together this great demo for us. And also I want to mention Angela, who's one of our QE right here in front. She's done a lot of testing on this joint solution. So
to make sure everything we're telling you actually functions.
Yeah, so it actually works, and this is not smoke and mirror. So let's give it a shot. I'll put on my getting old glasses here. Okay, so here I'm logged in as a user called VRA admin. And this user actually has two roles. Normally in a production environment, you might have users who are considered cloud users, and then you have the people who build the infrastructure. But in this case, so that you don't have to watch me log in and log out, I'm going to basically log in as one user. So the cloud users get things like the home, catalog, items, requests, and inbox tab, and the cloud admins get the advanced services, administration, and infrastructure tabs. So if I were logged in as in specific role that only had those access tabs come and go. So the first thing I would do if I'm a user is I log in and I get to the catalog. So the catalog, as Becky mentioned, it's a collection of available services. So my analogy here is it's like the IKEA catalog I got last night. I'm looking through it. There's a section over here on agile development. That's the kitchen furniture, or kitchen, and then there's infrastructure. That's like the bedroom. And each of these has a set of services or applications available. So what Bruce built for us was 3 different WordPress apps. We call them 1, 2, and 3. They're all slightly different. We're going to start out with number 3, which is everything on demand. So when, as a user, I click this request button, this application blueprint will build all the networking and security through the API on demand. And when I'm done with it, it'll delete it all. So here is in this case, we did a 2-tiered app. We wanted to show an actual app you guys might have seen and felt in the real world. It doesn't have to be 2 tiers. It can be 1 tier. It can be 10 tiers, whatever you want. If you do the hands-on labs, all the demos tend to have a 3-tiered sort of fictitious app. So here we have the Apache tier, and it's running 2 Apache web servers. And then we have the database tier, which is running a MySQL server. And in theory, I could click on one of these as a user, and I can change how many VMs I would have on that tier. So in this particular case, I can have more than 2 machines. I'll just leave it at 2. And certain other settings, Bruce, as the blueprint author, was able to give us the ability to tweak them. Whoops. You have something important to do at the gym. We're on Becky's machine here. Sorry about that.
Let's see, live demo.
Live demo, all right.
Do you guys see how many things I forgot to do? It was about 50.
Yeah, what's up with that? They're all meetings that I keep inviting her to, and she never shows up.
I just decline.
All right, so I'm going to hit the submit button, and we're going to start this process. So behind the scenes, again, calling the APIs of vSphere and NSX automatically, and it will basically go off and build all the required components. So if we go over to the request tab here, you can actually see that it's in progress. And I had a couple previous. I had another successful one. I had one that failed, a couple successes. So these are other applications I built in the past, but this one's in progress. And I'm going to jump over to the cloud admin role for a second. As a cloud admin, I can actually go in and take a look at what it's doing. So under the recent events tab, I'll see it. Oh, here we are. The gods of demo are not on our side today. Apparently it's some kind of issue. So we'll have to figure out why. But what it does is it'll give you a list of what's happening behind the scenes that allow this thing to be created. So from the earlier one that I did in an earlier session, you can see you have an NSX endpoint created, started, completed, all the different steps. Let's go back a bit, creating VMs, things like that. The end result is ultimately you'll have in the items tab your multi-machine application. So here's the one I made this morning. And if I open it, you'll have the 2 web servers and the database server that will ultimately be created from clicking on the blueprint. So let's take a look. Let's see if we can connect to one of these. What we did is after we spun them up, we jump over to this IE. Come on. And this is the actual WordPress app that was created. And Bruce did a little cheat here. He threw in the IP address of the actual web server you're hitting. So this is the IP address that is automatically generated by VRA and placed on the VIP, on the NSX load balancer. So that's the VIP IP, but this is the IP of the actual machine. And if I refresh this, I'll get to change, if it works, come on, it should change the IP address. Waiting for. So one of the things we did here is we were running this on the same infrastructure as the hands-on labs are going on right now. So probably what's happening is they're getting hammered. So let's do a live troubleshooting. Let's see if I can fix it. I don't know why it's not working. That is the risk. Okay, so bear with me here. So we'll jump over to this guy. You guys should be familiar with this guy called administrator at vSphere.local. We'll log in and see if I can figure out what's happening. So back to VRA, go back to the infrastructure tab. And bear with me, let's take a look at the log. Huh.
The demo gods.
The demo gods, yes, okay.
Why don't we go ahead and show them how you build that?
How I build it, okay.
So
well, let me try one thing, because if I can restart, I know what might have happened.
The controllers are down?
The controllers, yes.
This hasn't happened before.
What happens is for the hands-on labs, we shrink everything to the bare minimum amount of RAM and CPU just so that we cram as many labs into one environment as possible. By the way, all of the hands-on labs run on top of NSX, which is kind of a cool thing. So sometimes what happens is the controllers run out of RAM and they get, nope, they're running. Okay, well, let's just jump back to VRA and we'll keep going on the demo. So you'll have to take my word for it. When you launch the item, ultimately the item is built, and you can have your different tiers. You have your web tier and your app tier, and within each one of these tiers, you'd have different networking components. So this Apache tier, if you click on View Network, you'll see the VIP load balancing information. It's load balancing port HTTP. If I scroll down, not the best resolution in the world, here we are. You'll see that you get an external address from what's called an external network profile with that is the VIP address for the WordPress application. So my multi-tiered app is doing load balancing. So let's look at how the app was actually built. So the way this works is in the infrastructure tab, the blueprint author, who's usually the cloud admin, will create blueprints of the application. But before they create the blueprints, they build what are called network profiles. A network profile decides whether or not it's a routed network, meaning advertised over BGP or OSPF, or if it's a NATed network, meaning it's behind a NAT, and the NAT would run on the edge gateway. So if we go here under network profiles, we have a couple examples. So for this application, we call it the web app NAT profile, and I'll open it up and we'll take a look at what it looks like. So here, as Becky mentioned, we support one-to-one NAT and one-to-many NAT, and you connect this up to what's called an external network profile, which gives you your connectivity to the physical world. And you provide some information like the DNS server and the Win server and whether or not you want DHCP. In this example, we're using VRA to statically configure the IP addresses on the virtual machines. And those addresses come from this IP range here. So each new application that's spun up will pull the next available IP address from an IP range to IP the machines. And as she mentioned, you can also use an external IPAM system. If you have an Infoblox or BlueCat or Alcatel QIP or Quip, some people call it, all those, we have integrations with all those companies to do IPAM there. So we build these network profiles, either whether or not you want the networks to route or the networks to be NATed, and then you include them in a blueprint. So we'll take a look at one of our blueprints. So there are two kinds of blueprints in VRA. Whoops, come on. One is a single machine blueprint. That just describes how to build a single individual virtual machine. And one is called a multi-machine blueprint, which is how you can wire multiple machines together. So in this example, Bruce has built us a couple single machine blueprints. He has the database machine and the web app tier machine. And those are just how to spin up a VM, either as a linked clone or some kind of copy of a template, things like that. And then these are our three applications which have been published in the catalog. The WordPress app number 1, 2, and 3. And if you click on it and you hit edit, we can go in to look at what that application blueprint looks like. So we'll give it a sec. At least this part's working. Okay, so usually an application gets a name. You can name it whatever you choose, makes sense to your cloud users. You can specify how long it gets archived, so the user deletes the app, you kind of keep it around like the recycle bin. You can actually do costs, so you can do chargeback, showback. So if you want to bill your customers or attempt to bill your internal customers, that's a nice thing. And you can use VRB, the vRealize business product, to extend that. And it also has a nice ability to name the virtual machines. So it prepends the machine name with this string right here, WSAppRD, as a machine prefix. And then under the networking tab, we choose the appropriate settings. And in did I go to the wrong blueprint?
You did, yeah.
Sorry,
that's
I went to number 1. I
pre-existing.
need to go to number 3. So we go to the networking tab and we can see our two tiers that are created. Give it a sec. So under networking, both tiers in this case we decided to do NAT. So the first one is set up to say all the databases sit behind a NAT, and then the web tier all sit behind a NAT as well. This is particularly useful if you want the machines to get out, to be patched or hit DNS servers, etc., which most people would want to do. And then this checkbox will build an automatic NSX firewall rule around the entire application. So it'll completely isolate the app so that if I create one and then Becky creates a second one, those apps can't actually talk to each other. We build an automatic NSX firewall rule that basically says app A can't talk to app B, and then app B can't talk to app C. So that way my web tier can't talk to her web tier and vice versa, or DB tier, whatever. And then under the build information, for each of the actual single machine blueprints, so here's the single machine blueprint, we have a network button over here to view the settings there. So we have the settings for the database and the settings for the web tier. So let's take a look at the web tier machine. In this particular example, we've decided again to use static IP of those machines. We are telling the system each machine gets one NIC. We could have theoretically more than one NIC. Under the load balancing, we say we want to load balance this tier. So we check the HTTP, we could have checked HTTPS, whatever health check intervals, response time, settings like that you want from your load balancer. And then we scroll down and we say, okay, we're gonna have a VIP, and I'm gonna leave the IP address blank because I want it to come automatically from the IPAM system, so the VIP happens dynamically. And then finally, under the security tab, I can go over here and I can pick the appropriate security policies that apply. So for this application, it showed as grayed out because I've already made one of these off the blueprint. But this particular application, this tier, we're going to have an app-wide policy, so a policy that controls the entire application, what can go inbound, what can come out, inbound and outbound. And then for this specific tier, we check a policy for that. For the other tier, for the database tier, we would check the top one and the bottom one instead. Now that's for on-demand security groups and security policy. It'll create everything through the API. You can also predefine certain security groups in NSX and just place the VMs in those security groups. And these are down here. So sometimes people will also make a security group for PCI compliance, so certain rules for PCI, or maybe they'll do something that is dev, stage, and prod and have security groups for different stages in your app's lifecycle type of thing. So that's setting all the networking and security components within the application. And I'm going to go into NSX in a second and show you what they look like from the NSX view. But that's pretty much how you build the blueprint. There's some other tabs here I'm not going to go into that have to do with how to customize VRA, how to script things automatically. You can do custom properties to set special stuff. By the way, all this stuff calls an series of orchestrator workflows. This is all highly extensible. So how many of you know how to use the orchestrator and use the orchestrator? Okay, so if you know how to build a workflow in the orchestrator, you can call that workflow from within VRA, which basically means you can do anything you want. I think we had a customer from some defense agency, I can't say who, right, who joked around that he had an API on a missile launching system, and he was going to build a workflow to launch a missile, you know, and publish it in the catalog, with approvals, of course.
Right, with approvals, of course. His boss was not in the room when he was talking about this.
Of course, he was kidding around, but you know, you can build a workflow to call practically any API on the planet. You could make it post to Twitter when you spin up an app, whatever you want to do. You can do it. So that's kind of a cool thing about the VRA product and extensibility. These guys think that's funny. Every time a new app comes, you're going to tweet on it. Okay, so let's take a look at the NSX side of things. Okay, so within NSX, I have the logical switching tab, and here is where I can have either pre-created switching where the VMs will be placed. So these ones that are labeled with legacy would be used for the pre-created use case. So I want the NSX admin to make the network and then just put the VMs on it. And then you see these ones with these UUIDs after them, so this long string of numbers and characters. Those are the ones that were created on demand from my application. So they are dynamically created. They'll come and go as the application comes and goes. And the same applies to the edge gateways. So here we have a legacy edge gateway where we might have pre-created the routing and switch, or the routing infrastructure, and then we're connecting to it. Or we have an on-demand edge. And the on-demand edge was dynamically created when the user clicked on the catalog item. So let's talk about the most important part over here, which is the security policies and the security rules. So I'm going to go to what we call Service Composer, which is where we manage this stuff. Let's get some more screen real estate here. Within security or Service Composer, I set security policies, and those are the security policies that showed up in the blueprint that you can choose from. So we have a web app tier, a WordPress app tier, a WordPress database tier, things like that. So we'll take a look at this web app tier policy and see what rules are associated with it. So if I click on Manage, I see that it's associated with a security group called WordPress app tier, and also a dynamically created security group that was created from my application. So all those VMs were placed in this dynamically created security group, and this policy was automatically applied to it by VRA. So that shows you that the VM, well, let me give you a different view of that. This is kind of not the best view. Let's go back to here on what we call the canvas. So on the canvas, these are the dynamically created security groups. And if we look at them, you can see, hold on a bit, what policies are applied to them. So for this particular policy, we see that it has both the WordPress application, its policy, as well as the WordPress web tier policy. And if I look at the WordPress web tier policy, I can see what rules apply. Give it a sec. So here are the firewall rules that are associated with that. So here we would say we're going to allow any traffic from one we're going to block any traffic from one web server to another, because we never want traffic to go between two web servers on the same tier. So that's something unique that you can do here in NSX. It's not easy to do in a physical firewall because we control firewalling down to the VNIC level. And then here we're going to permit inbound for SSH so we can administer the web servers, as well as HTTP and HTTPS. So that gives you the ability to get into this tier of the application. Becky mentioned briefly about other integrations with NSX. So if you also want to apply other types of policies like an antivirus policy, we support McAfee, Trend, and Symantec antivirus engines that you can say that anybody in this tier must also be scanned by an antivirus tool. And we support being able to run traffic in and out of an IDS IPS. So if you run something like the McAfee IDS IPS, you can actually send the traffic out to the IPS and bring it back in. So if the web server lands in this group, it will automatically be protected by that IDS IPS. So that's a brief view of that web tier. Okay, hang on. Okay, so ultimately all these rules end up in the master firewall rule table over here, where we see each of the different tiers created, the WordPress web app tier and the database tier. And if you open them, you get sort of the traditional firewall rule table. So if you're a firewall admin and you've used Checkpoint or most of the other firewall products on the market, it should be fairly familiar to you. Here are the permit inbound traffic for the security group that was created on demand, and that's how that gets resulted in the NSX GUI. Okay, so we got about 15 minutes left, so we're going to leave some time for questions, but I'm going to go back to VRA and we'll look at one of the other blueprints, which is, this was the everything on demand blueprint. We'll take a look at a blueprint that attaches the VMs to pre-created networking and security components. This is particularly useful if you have a brownfield deployment and you're trying to attach NSX on top of an existing infrastructure. So if you might have some already created VLANs and you bridge those into VXLAN, you can then connect VMs to those VXLANs and protect them with NSX firewalling and security features. So that is this one, which is our WordPress application number 1. And it's slightly different. It's a little odd because there are no network profiles in it. And that's because you're attaching to already pre-created components. What you do is in the build information, you still see that each of these different tiers, these different VMs, will be attached to a network. In this particular case, we're attaching these web VMs to the legacy web tier that has already been created by NSX admin. And we still want load balancing. So in this particular case, it isn't configured here. It calls a custom workflow script that Bruce wrote in the orchestrator to attach to that legacy edge. So we can add and remove VIPs from an already pre-created edge. But on the security side, we definitely want to consume NSX security. So we can still place any VM that lands in this tier into the appropriate security groups and get the right policy applied to it. And the same goes for the database tier. You have the legacy database subnet, basically. It's going to get a static IP, and the appropriate NSX security group applies, one for the entire application as well as one that's specific to the database tier. And then finally, we'll take a look at the third use case, which is where you have a hybrid. You might want to have pre-created networking, but you want all the security to come on demand based on policy. This one's kind of the in between the other two, and it has a nice advantage that everything's policy-based and not statically configured on the security front. Let's take a look at that. Give it a second. Okay, so this one's a little bit different than the one I just showed you. Again, you have networking pre-created, so you're not creating any network profiles. You're not doing any on-demand networking, but each application tier is attached to a security group in the security tab over here, or sorry, a policy. So when this user clicks on this catalog item, they will automatically get dynamic security groups with the appropriate security policies. So they'll be protected based on the policy. So that pretty much sums up a quick demo without the minor detail of the one part not working. So we wanted to leave a bit of time for Q&A. So there are on both sides. So if you have any questions about how it works or what we're doing or what would be the next step for you, we're open to questions. Or if there's no questions, not a big deal. You can watch me try to debug it too. Nope. All right.
Questions, you guys? Okay, so make sure to check out the hands-on labs. So you guys actually play with this technology yourself. So we've got multiple hands-on labs listed there, 1632, 1624, and 1603 for NSX and VRA integrations in different levels. Some of them are full extensibility. Others are more kind of straightforward. There's also an advanced technical deep dive, you guys, on Wednesday around showing you how to extend beyond the out-of-the-box capability Andrew and I showed you today into how do you extend further with VRO and NSX and VRA. So feel free to check that out as well. All right. Thank you, guys. Enjoy the rest of your show.